Over the edge, feel like I'm floating through the air.
Okay,
All
now
right, everybody, welcome in to Real Talk with Spoon and Pudding. I'll be the one and only Big Spoon.
I'll be
Episode 60.
try number 2 because we were off Facebook.
We'll Pudding introduce our famous
Hey,
guest of the week.
well, this is Mr. Archie from the Tennessee Firearms Association. Well, I mean that's not your primary, but you you work with them, correct?
I do. I'm the West Tennessee director of the Tennessee Firearms Association.
All right. Well, we spoke a couple times on the phone, and I talked to you Saturday about some of this stuff, and wanted to let you come on here since we're in one of your favorite Tennessee representatives districts.
Yeah.
Let you talk about the problems that we're having in the state.
One of the things that I think is important that we look at is what the different locales in the state are trying to do right now. We got this red flag mess coming up from the governor. Have y'all been keeping up with that deal?
I have.
Red flag laws are simply a situation where they can come kick your door in at 2:00 in the morning, shoot your dog, and then come into your house and take your guns because somebody let the popo know that you were a danger or threat to yourself or to someone else. They don't have to have any proof. No, you don't get a chance to stand before a judge and give your side of it. None of that happens. The only thing that results from a red flag law is that they come in and take your guns. Now, they don't take your gasoline or your matches or your chopping axe or your hatchet or your shoestrings or your hammer or any of those things, but they do come in and get your guns because that's what causes it all, right? The guns.
Oh yeah. Me and Spoon have had these conversations about
Yeah,
can't.
I'm afraid that gun's going to jump off the wall.
Yeah.
It's I trained it well. I raised it right, Richard.
I've got an old Albert Johnson champion that my grandfather got from his grandfather that was made sometime just before, as I understand it, the 1900s. It was made in 1800. I've got that old single barrel shotgun, one that I used to kill my first coon. It rolled me down the hill, by the way, at 12 gauge. It was a 32-inch full choke. That's what they used to burn them coons out of the top of the hill. And, it's been sitting in my closet since my grandfather passed away 20-something years ago. It hasn't shot anybody.
Mm-mm. Well, I was Mr. Spoon there, had a domestic 20 years ago, and I think I mentioned that to you. And he's ineligible to own a gun unless it was made for some reason in 1899 or older. He can own one of them.
Yeah.
Or he could own a black powder gun legally. But, if it was made in 1900, no, not legal for him.
Well, you'll be interested to find out there have been a number of court cases that have come up in different districts from Tennessee. There's one in Texas. It's called Perez-Galan, and that's where they found 922 G8 unconstitutional because of the Bruin decision. One of the things that we've had that's to our best benefit here in the state of Tennessee is the Bruin decision, which came out last June. And that's a Supreme Court case, and it was about the state of New York. Now, don't let these culls tell you that just because it's a federal case, it doesn't have bearing on the state of Tennessee. And how I would prove that, when they ruled Roe v. Wade in the Supreme Court, people in Tennessee were able to have abortions, weren't they? And then this last year, when they ran the Dobbs case from down in Mississippi at the Supreme Court of the United States of America, then it stopped the ability of Tennesseans to have abortions in Tennessee. So if any person tells you that the Bruin decision does not have application to the state of Tennessee, they're lying to you. They want you to believe that because of their position, that they know more than you do. Concrete finishers like me don't understand this stuff. We're just supposed to be silent, sit over in the corner and go, yes, boss, that's what's going on. That's not how I operate. What I do is I read the different court rulings. I pore over them so that I'm sure that I understand. I've got a cadre of friends that are attorneys. And when I get my questions up, I call them and say, what exactly does this mean? And so therefore, it's not just Richard looking at it, but I have got a group of attorneys that help me to understand. And what the Bruin decision said is this. if it was not on the books of the federal government at the time of the ratification of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment, by the way, if it wasn't on the books with respect to a gun law at that point, then you can't use it for scrutiny on the Second or 14th Amendment rights of an American. You have to understand that in 2010 in McDonald v. City of Chicago, the Supreme Court of the United States incorporated the Second Amendment against the states through the Due Process Clause of the 14th, which means that the state of Tennessee is bound by the same set of chains that the federal government is in the Second Amendment, which says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, that's pretty simple. There's not a bunch of gobbledygook with that. If they're not supposed to infringe our rights, and then they've incorporated that against the states, then that means the states can't infringe that right either. So back to Spoon's deal with his domestic 20 years ago, I think within the next 6 months, you're going to see that fall, because the one in Perez Glan, there was a young man in his semi. He was driving intrastate, which in Texas allows you to carry a handgun in your vehicle. You can't cross state lines and be a truck driver, but if it's just intrastate, you can. And so he was a Hispanic individual. And so the chances are that he might be smuggling drugs for the popo out there. That, hey, do you mind if we search your vehicle? And do you have any guns? I said, yes, I got a handgun in my backpack. And so they went and they searched his deal. He said, it's okay, search. I got enough. They found in his backpack a folded up slip from Kentucky, I believe, from 2010, where he had a restraining order placed against him in a domestic at that time. Now, he was never convicted of a crime, but they issued the restraining order. And so law enforcement then took him into custody and took his gun. And what this resulted in was the judge, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here, but he said, before Bruin, the Second Amendment appeared to be a abandoned cabin left out in the woods, overgrown with roots, vines, and weeds. And federal gun laws are that overgrowth, starting with the 1938 case. And he said, and since that time, gun laws have been passed with little to no consideration as to their constitutionality until Bruin. And now what we're required to do as the lower courts is decide whether to excise that overgrowth with a scalpel or a chainsaw. And he ruled 922 G8, which has that domestic thing in it, unconstitutional. Now, it hadn't been heard by the Supreme Court, and it hasn't been heard in our federal district. But, brother, it's coming this direction because there wasn't anything on the books at the time saying there was a law against a domestic dispute keeping you from having a gun. What you have to understand about the Second Amendment is every person who is not a felon has a right to have a firearm in case of confrontation with another. What we find in Heller, when Scalia was talking about it, he said, he quoted St. George Tucker when he said that self-defense is the true palladium of liberty. And if in fact that's the case, the only people that are kept from being able to have a firearm in the United States are felons. And I don't think that a misdemeanor, domestic assault, or even the suggestion that occurred gives them the ability to keep you from having a gun. And I think you're going to see that change over the course of the
It shouldn't.
No, we was talking Saturday, and I talked to you Saturday. We was talking about this, and I'm like, the difference between a felony 200 years ago and today is just, it's night and day. They've completely just tried to group so many people into being felons just so they can take away their rights or make it look like, hey, we're going to, and I've always said this, that once you get out of jail, there's no reason you shouldn't have your voting rights restored like that.
No, if you have done the penance that the court required, you spent your time in jail, you've made restitution for whatever dollars you were supposed to do. Once you satisfy those constraints, what happened at the time of the founding was this: if they let you out of jail, they gave you your horse, your voting rights, and your guns back. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they hung you. It was that simple. If they didn't feel like it was safe to turn you back on the general population, they didn't turn you back on the general population. And so every felony, and where we get the word felony is from an infamous crime, and that's murder, rape, something of that magnitude. And so at the time of the founding, every felony was a capital offense, which meant that they put you to death. They didn't send you to jail for 25 years and let you have access to a library and get you a law degree and all that kind of stuff. They simply weren't going to feed you. They weren't going to put up with that noise. So what they did was they erased you from the general population so that you were no longer a problem. They didn't have a problem with recidivism at that point.
You know, me and Puddin's talked about this. I find it comical that something that was a misdemeanor, and I was young and didn't know no better, you know, because, you know, people think of domestic. They say, well, you beat your wife. Domestic it's not just that. Domestic is a wide range of things. And you don't even have to be guilty of putting your hands on anybody to be arrested for domestic. And back when I was arrested, I'd never been in trouble anymore. The DA tricked me into pleading guilty. You know, I didn't know any better, you know. But it's comical that they change these laws and tell me that I can't own or purchase a handgun or any kind of gun. But I've been a truck driver for right at 20 years, and 18 of those years I've had my hazmat and hauled dynamite and everything else that is far more dangerous than any kind of handgun you could purchase. And that's completely fine. You know, you can carry all this dynamite and blow up all the buildings you want, but you can't buy a handgun, you know.
Yeah. One of the facts that I think is interesting, if you look at the most egregious, most serious school cause of death in the United States ever, there wasn't a firearm of any type, no handgun, no rifle, no anything involved in that. It was a guy up in Michigan, I believe, that had lost a race for school board, and he was actually the janitor at the school, and he got ticked off about it, and so he set explosives and diesel fuel up underneath the school. And at a night when the parents group was there, he set it all off. He killed himself, blew his truck up as well, but he burned 58 people to death. Now, he didn't use a gun, but
Right.
you know, all the shootings that have taken place in the United States don't come anywhere close to the number of deaths that he caused with diesel fuel and dynamite.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you can get out of look up certain ingredients and go purchase those once you get out of jail for being and you did you see where Illinois is going to start turning people loose with no bond?
Yeah.
For second degree murder.
Hey, look what they did in Memphis. They had a guy that was arraigned on first degree murder, and they turned him loose with no bond. And yet what they're doing now, you can't get first degree murder. Not manslaughter, not any of that. And it's, oh, well, we made a mistake. You got a George Soros DA down there that is absolutely not going to convict anybody of a crime. And they're wondering why. Now, I was on a radio program down in Memphis the other day, and a guy told me they had 178 cars broken into at the FedEx Forum the night before. I said, oh, my goodness. He said, man, it's been over 2,000 this year. Now, if the police know that the FedEx Forum parking lot is a spot where people are going to break into cars, don't you think they'd have a sting operation going on to maybe stop some of that? But Memphis Police Department has said, we're not going to stop any cars anymore for any reason. It's just congruous to me. I can't understand why you're going to talk about wanting to disallow people the ability to enjoy a right enumerated in our Constitution, but you'll let all these crimes that we know are serious crimes go without any effect whatsoever. Doesn't make any sense to me.
No, like I said, it's the laws today have just, and I say since post NFA, as soon as that went on the books, and that was the first time I spoke with you on the phone because Mr. Doggett's office put me in contact with you,
right?
Because I was wanting to call about, for the same reason that a fully automatic M4 can be given to any military official without going through a 9-month waiting list. But I mean, we remember was it the Hughes Amendment, I believe, is what got rid of machine guns, or was it Hughes or Hobbs? You remember? It was 86. It was in 86 when they banned new production machine guns.
Right now, but you need to understand, it's not just military officials that can have them, but every police officer in the United States can have them.
Well, see, that was what I was wanting to talk to Doggett about, was why doesn't the state of Tennessee start a militia enrollment where if you were in the militia, you'd be able to acquire them just like a police officer or a military person, silencer, SBR, SBS, whatever, just buy whatever you want because you're registered as the militia.
Well, and I have always thought of the whole thing this way. Either one of y'all ever duck hunt?
No, I don't really hunt. I hunt
Well,
paper.
when you go duck hunting, you have to go to the post office and you have to buy a duck stamp. It is a tax stamp because it's a federal issue. And so therefore, what you have to do is you have to go pay them a tax to be able to duck hunt. All right.
Mhm.
Well, that's exactly the same thing as the tax stamp that you buy when you put your SBR or short barrel shotgun or your moderator, your silencer, in jail waiting for the ATF to get there. It's exactly the same thing. Now, when you buy a duck stamp, they're going to let you take a 10 gauge and you can at that point go out there with the heaviest load of shot in the world. And I'm going to tell you right now, I know a little bit about firearms. If I was going to try to street sweep a place, I'd pick that 10 gauge duck gun of mine up and I'd be loading it up with some number 4 buckshot, and you could clear an area in a heartbeat. But they let you, that day that you go in there and pay that $25 duck stamp, you can go use that 10 gauge. But if you buy a silencer, which countries in Europe right now require you to do, everybody that has a high-powered rifle in Europe has to have a silencer because they don't want it to bother everybody else when you trip the trigger. But here, because they didn't know how to keep organized crime from running up and down the road, they said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that you can't have them. Well, of course, you can't have fentanyl either. They're running that stuff across the border. You boys are truck drivers. You know how much that stuff is coming across from Mexico.
It was when I first heard about fentanyl I think it was 18 or 19. You could order it from China and it would just be shipped straight to your door. You could order tubs of it.
And all this stuff that's going on, if you want to look at the causal agent of deaths in the United States, I can promise you in the state of Tennessee right now that fentanyl kills far more people than AR-15s do.
No, it's
no doubt. Hammers kill more people in Tennessee each year than AR-15s do.
You know what the leading cause of death for men from the age of 21 to 45 is?
Outside of heart disease, what would it be?
Suicide.
Well, and now, here's one that's very interesting. I'm seeing all these doctors, and the TMA has come, Tennessee Medical Association, are putting forth, here are the 10 things we need to do. Make sure you got secure storage in your house. Make sure that people don't have access. Make sure you can't have over 10 round magazines. Make sure you don't have assault weapons. Make sure all this crap. But one of the leading causes, the third leading cause of death in the United States every year is medical mistakes.
Oh yeah, we don't.
So you got these doctors talking about this. No, heart disease kills more people than anything else. I mean, all three of us are rather portly. You can tell from looking at it. And we know. And so I run that big old smoker out there and I make my ribs and I cook my pork butts and stuff like that. And I love it to death. And you're only going to live so long anyway. So you might as well enjoy it. But the thing that kills more people than about anything else is heart disease. Now, if you also look at Tennessee, medical malpractice kills more people than all gunshots. And in that, the highest number of gun-related deaths is suicide. And if you don't think a person isn't going to find a way to kill herself if they made that up, they'll just simply go to the cabinet in the bathroom in there and pull all their drugs out and take an overdose of that, and that's going to happen. Or they can go down to any street corner and get them 3 hits of fentanyl, and they'll be dead in 30 seconds. So they're trying to protect us from ourselves. And if you go back to look at some of the founders of the country that said, do you feel like we're going to turn our guns against our own breast? What you have to look at from Tench Cox is this. He was one of the signers of the Declaration. He said that the sword and every terrible implement of the soldier are the birthright of every American. We wouldn't have a republic or a state of Tennessee today were it not for a group of people who got up off their haunches and with their personal rifles marched across the Allegheny Mountains and went over to Kings Mountain and killed Ferguson during the Revolutionary War. They were not soldiers. And these weren't They were at the time the assault weapon of the day, because we had Kentucky type rifles that actually had spiral grooves down the barrel, and we could shoot you at 300 yards. And the British all had muskets that were, effective out to about 100. And so we had a lot better armament at that time. But because Tennesseans who were volunteers and who went across the mountains to fight, Ferguson's the guy that said anybody that picks up a firearm against the crown, we're going to lay waste to his lands with fire and sword. And John Sevier and William Campbell and that group of individuals said, I don't think so. And they got together at the Shoals over there in East Tennessee, and they marched across the mountains, and they caught Ferguson over there. And in about an hour and a half, they shot him off his horse and cut his head off, dropped his lifeless body on the ground, went home. Now, if you look at Tennessee, if you think about it, we are the leader across the board in people who are willing to write on that line of the check their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. When you come from that point, and George Washington, I've read a number of different cases that we would not have won the war had it not been for those rough Western North Carolina, and that at that time is what Tennessee was. Group of individuals that went across on their own volition. Nobody made them. They weren't army. They just went over and shot the fire out of them people and took care of the southern advance of the British. And that's what allowed him to win the war. Now, secondarily, when you come back to 1814 and how we got our name, most people say, well, it's something to do with the Spanish-American War.
Jackson.
It has nothing to do with it. It's when the provisional governor, Willie Brown, stood on the courthouse steps at Nashville and said, I need 2,500 volunteers to go with Colonel Jackson down into Alabama to fight the Red Sticks. And 5,000 showed up. And now we're talking about Coffee and Carroll and David Crockett and Sam Houston. All those boys went down the Natchez Trace into Alabama at Horseshoe Bend and killed the Red Sticks. And then they turned around from Pensacola, Florida at that point and marched all the way across New Orleans and defeated the finest that the British had at that point. 5,000 Tennessee volunteers. This is one thing that just tears me up. I was in a committee meeting, and an individual that just happens to be a Democrat was pontificating that in the War of 1812, there wasn't any militia at all. I thought, what? And this guy's an attorney. And he's sitting there running that mess out there in front of everybody, and it was all I could do to keep them getting up and say, point of order. They don't let me do that in these committee hearings, even though I spend a lot of time there, and they know I know my business because I spend a lot of time studying. But he said there was absolutely no militia involved in the War of 1812. Had there not been Tennessee militia, we would not have defeated the Red Sticks, who were just absolute raising hell all over the southeast United States. And the British would have been able to land their troops that had just got through defeating Napoleon at Waterloo. They put their best on a boat, brought them over here and dumped them off down there. And you've all heard the song about we fired our guns and the British kept it coming. There wasn't
powdered that gators.
That's what and you got to look at 5,000 Tennessee volunteers went down there and defeated the best that the British had. So how can they, and this is the one that got me this year, the director of the TBI said this out loud in front of God and everybody. He said, well, the Second Amendment doesn't confer any right whatsoever to any person to carry a firearm. It simply gives the states power to regulate that. And then when asked by, and let me tell you, there's a couple of new guys up there. Gino Bolso was actually doing the questioning on that, and he is absolutely fantastic. He said, wouldn't you agree? If you go back to what Scalia said, that arms are protected by the Second Amendment, even those that were not in use at the time of the founding. And he said, no. If in fact you're going to allow people to carry long guns in Tennessee, and by the way, I don't think that you're supposed to be able to carry them. It says only that you can keep them in your home. He said, but if you're going to carry them outside the home, then it only covers muskets. When you get to saying the Second Amendment only covers muskets, you have given up your right to even speak to me. That's just so ridiculous. I don't know what to say.
They need to write you with a quill and paper, right?
Yeah. Well, and the thing that I pointed out to a lot of the legislators, he had a cell phone and an iPad at the desk, and he's sitting there going over that stuff. He doesn't know how to answer the questions, so he's sending that stuff back to his people. He's got people, and so they're trying to answer for him because he doesn't know. He couldn't even quote the Second Amendment.
I'll tell you something else you'll find comical. My son's in the military, so he has his military weapon, right? When he came home, he tried to purchase him an AR. And what they do to it, Puddin'?
10-day wait. They made him wait the full 10 days.
What state was that in?
Tennessee.
Tennessee.
Here.
What?
No, it's because of the Uvalde and the Safer Community Act. 18 to 20-year-olds. That's what's been going on.
Yeah.
See, but
Well,
if the Chinese were coming into California, they'd sure send them over there and hand them a rifle and a pistol and say, shoot.
Well, absolutely. Think about this. When Jackson went over to New Orleans, what was the first thing he did? He went to the jails and he told all the prisoners inside, said, any man that will pick up a firearm to stand for the Republic, we absolve you of all your crimes. And he put them boys on the front line because what they have to lose, you know? Think about that.
Yeah. No, it's a different time. And today we've convinced everyone that as soon as you're accused of something, you're guilty. And once we find out that you wrote a bad check and we can give you a felony, you don't have a right to defend yourself no more, unless you find one of them 1899 guns that's somehow different.
Think about this. All these attorneys that are legislators have jumped in and they have applied. If you've had 2 DUIs within the last 10 years or 1 within the last 5, you can't perfect a handgun carry permit. You can't carry a gun in public to defend yourself. Now, they haven't said, let's go ahead and put them to death if they're out here causing problems on the road. And if you're actually driving under the influence, let's go ahead and do away with them. No, they want to make money off of it. But what they want to say at this point is, because you were driving under the influence, you no longer have a right to defend yourself. I don't think that's. Have you heard about the Columbia case, Columbia Housing and Redevelopment Corporation up in East Tennessee? Or not East Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, actually. There was a young man who was living in government supplied housing, and he read the Bruin case, and he said, I don't think that you can keep me from having a firearm in government supplied housing. Of course, when you go in there, you have to sign an agreement that you'll have no firearms in your apartment if you're living in government supplied housing. So he said, I don't think you can do that anymore. And they said, well, try us out. He said, well, I'm going to tell you now, I'm going to have a handgun in my apartment because you people, number one, don't provide protection and are not under any statutory requirement whatsoever responsible for my security or safety. And I can show you a number of Supreme Court cases that say that very thing. Law is not required to provide protection for any individual.
Okay? Isn't there a Supreme Court case that come out of Tennessee from being shot in the back by a police officer in retreat? Isn't that, was it Memphis, I think it was, back in the 70s? Protected the police.
I don't know about that one, but don't mean it don't exist.
Well, I mean, you got so many court cases that, go back, like the police have no duty to defend you.
That's correct. You look at those 3 stewardesses that were in New York, and they were in a hotel room, or actually in their apartment, and the guy broke in. The neighbors next door called the police and said, hey, they're down there raping and killing these women. Y'all need to show up. And so they showed up, knocked on the door. Nobody came to the door, and they turned around and left. And so after 2 days of solid rape and just beating the fire out of these people, they sued the police department in New York and said, y'all can't do that. And they said, of course we can, because we're not responsible. And the term that you need to understand there is they have qualified immunity. Mm-hmm. So that means that they're not responsible. Not only is there no statutory requirement that they provide protection for you, they actually are covered by qualified immunity. Think about it this way. Cops are chasing the guy down the street in their squad car, and he turns the corner and they lose control and run into your house and kill your 3-year-old in your living room. You can't sue them for that. They've got qualified immunity. The state, and that's the way they use the term, the state cannot be responsible for that, because if in fact they were responsible for providing security and protection for everybody, it would break us, the people, because we're the ones that fund that. And so there's no possible way that we could put enough money in to make them responsible. So lawyers and judges that are hooked with the DA's office and the court system and the police and state officials, the governor. You have to understand in Article 3, Section 10 of the Tennessee Constitution, it says the governor is supposed to faithfully enforce the laws of this state. Now, to me, that means that he's responsible for enforcing the laws of this state. And if he doesn't, he fails in his fiduciary responsibility to the people. But no, he's covered by qualified immunity. It's just stuff they say. They don't mean it.
Well, you mentioned the DUI thing. I wanted to, since we're in Lambers, you told me Saturday something that was very disturbing to me about 2 DUIs.
Yeah.
So you've heard him. You've heard him say that he believes that 2 DUIs disqualifies you from a second.
Well, what it does, it keeps you from being able to have a handgun carry permit so that you can carry it with you. It's in the bill that he ran in 2021, which the governor calls constitutional carry. People need to understand that that bill, when it was put forward, was simply a group of enhanced penalties, and they got to make up what the crimes were. And so if you're now guilty of stalking, if you've got 2 DUIs within the last 10 years or one within 5 years, you're precluded from being able to have a handgun carry permit. If you got one, you got to turn it in. And so you're just not able to provide protection for yourself, and you can't count on the police to do it. And the county's not responsible, and the city is not responsible, and the state's not responsible.
Well, I didn't think you need a permit now anyway.
Well, you don't in certain places at certain times, but you can't carry in the park. And you know where else you can't carry? Go to Cordell Hull. People like me that have an enhanced carry permit can walk right past the officer down there, wave at them. They know me well enough now that yeah, you've got a permit. We know that. We know you. So I just go right through. If you don't have a permit, you can't carry in Cordell Hull. You can't carry on the park. You can't carry on the school grounds anywhere. You can't carry in wildlife refuges, stuff like that. There's just a lot of places that you can't carry. No greenways, any of that, unless you have the permit. Because I say, if you hadn't been trained, if you don't know, and let me tell you, the handgun carry permit class that they teach you is not all that.
Well, the thing I'll never understand is like most of the things you just listed are public areas.
That's correct.
All that is control, you know.
Yeah.
Me and Puddin talked about this. It's been about a year ago where the mom was going to a party with her daughter at school. There was a threat of shooting at the school. Somebody called in and said they were going to shoot up that school that day. So she wore her vest and took her gun with her to try to protect them in case it happened. One of the teachers seen she was bulky and called the police on her, and they show up. Of course, she goes to jail, and that should not happen.
It should not. In Tennessee, the law on that, so that everybody understands, if you are lawful to carry that firearm, and by the way, any person who is not a felon in the state of Tennessee or hasn't been adjudicated mentally deficient can carry a loaded firearm, either handgun or long gun, in their car. You can't get out with it, supposedly. Now, what are the chances that if you are faced with a situation that's life or death, you're not going to step out of their car and use that long gun? And one of the things, Jeff Long, who is the commissioner of the Department of Safety, is talking about the last bill that we tried to run, which was 1503 in the House, or excuse me, 1005 in the House, 1503 in the Senate, which allowed long guns into the permissible class of weapons. Now, 42 other states allow you to carry a long gun without a permit. 4 more states allow you to carry it with a permit. There are only 4 states in the union that say it's a crime for you to carry a long gun loaded on your person. That is New York, New Jersey, Tennessee, and Florida.
Well, what happened because
it's okay.
Back when I was in school and my dad was in school, you carried the guns with you, and you had a gun rack in your pickup, and they took their guns to school and for show and tell, and they went hunting. And
of course, it's illegal for you to do that now. You have to understand that's a crime for you to put a firearm in the back window of your truck.
What happened for them to change their mind in this state?
Well, it's a control thing, like you were saying a while ago. They want to be able to control the narrative. They want to be able to control the people, because an armed society is a polite society. They don't want us to be polite to each other anymore. They want all this fighting and crap going on and stuff, because then we have to turn around and go back to government to protect us.
Yeah,
People,
we talk about that all the time. That's all the chaos with the fighting between the whites and the blacks, and then the blacks and Spanish and Asians. That's not really what's going on. That's what the media portrays,
Correct.
and they push it, and want us to stay at each other's throats because they don't want unity. Because if you had unity of the people, what great things could you accomplish in getting these crooked, you know what, out of there?
Yeah, that's true.
well, I believe, like I read an article like 2 decades ago. They were talking about these the Wild West and all these movies that came out of Hollywood, and from the '60s on, Hollywood portrayed Billy the Kid was a rarity, Jesse James rarity. They were very rare back in them days because everybody standing in the bank had a damn gun on their hip.
That's right.
And it was very peaceful. And they don't want you to know the truth. They want you to believe the mock-up that everybody was just going out in the street at high noon shooting each other.
Well,
and that ain't.
We had this year, speaking of that very thing, a bill that was put forth by Kip Capley, a young man from over in Lawrence County. Really good hand. He's the youngest member of the General Assembly. He's 23 years old. And he has got it going on because, number one, he reads and studies. But he carried a bill that I worked with him on that would have done away with the 2016 prescription from our General Assembly that said it's a crime for you to carry a handgun into a courthouse. Prior to that, in Tennessee, the law said you couldn't carry a firearm into a courtroom. But the bill was put forth in 2016, which changed the simple one word from courtroom to courthouse. And so now you are required to leave your firearm in your car when you go to buy your license plates, when you go to pay your taxes, when you go to do anything inside that courthouse, like Madison County down here. We've got a chancellor's court up on the 3rd floor. That's the only court that we got in that thing. But now where I do all of my business, I have to leave my gun in my car. Now, what the Constitution says that I have a right as a non-felon to carry a firearm in case of confrontation with another. That's the way Scalia defined it. They re-admitted that in McDonald in 2010, and then Bruin has quoted Scalia again in this case. That's 3 separate Supreme Court cases that say every person has a right to carry a firearm in case of confrontation with another, either offensively or defensively in public. Now, why do we have legislators standing in Nashville right now saying, no, let's make up a set of rules over here that keeps you from being able to do that? They evidently, it's got to be one or two things they don't know, or they know when they're using their office under color of their official employment to deny the citizens their rights enumerated in the Constitution. If you look at 39-16-403, that's called official oppression. That's a Class E felony, which would keep them from being able to have a firearm as well. But you know what? You can't get a DA across the state to prosecute one of them for it. If you have the director of the TBI stand up there and say, no, the Second Amendment does not protect the right of a Tennessean to carry a firearm, a long gun, outside his home. If we know that that is in fact covered, because the SCOTUS rulings have showed us that, and he told us at the very first of his testimony, I've done a deep dive into Heller and Bruin. If he has, he's got monkey pudding for brains, because if he couldn't understand what it said when it said even those firearms that were not in existence at the time of the founding are covered under the Second Amendment, what is it that he doesn't understand about that? So to me, it means that he, as the top cop in Tennessee, knows the difference and is willing to use his official capacity to try to affect legislation to keep us from being able to enjoy the rights and privileges as enumerated in our Constitution. That's really, really bothersome to me.
Yeah.
I just don't understand how people can't. First of all, this day and age, most people don't know history. They don't research it. But our founding fathers were very intelligent people, far more intelligent than most of the population today. And if people don't think for one second that they didn't know what they were writing and that times would change when they wrote that Constitution, uh, what was the word that Jefferson changed?
Oh no, Franklin changed. It was
Frank.
no, Jefferson wrote the whole Declaration of Independence, and self-evident was a word Benjamin Franklin put in. It's the only word in the Declaration of Independence that was changed. And Franklin, I believe he said it smacked to the pulpit what Jefferson had originally wrote, and he said, "Are these not self-evident?" And basically, yes. Okay, well, that now your hand isn't the only one in the document.
But back then, when we fought for our revolution, we were using military type weapons back then because that was the weapon of the age.
Absolutely.
They knew 100 years from now, 200, 300 years from now, times would change, weapons would change, people change. They knew exactly what they were writing. They wouldn't. You think people think they wrote that and said, "Well, you can only use a musket because that's what."
So they look at the Fourth Amendment. It's a great one. It, people, persons, and effects. They included everything.
And the whole thing about due process will go back to that red flag law. We're guaranteed due process by our Constitution, which means that we get to face our accuser, we get to mount a defense, we get to have counsel. Look at these poor guys that's still locked up on January 6th. They haven't come before a judge. They haven't had a speedy trial.
You seen the Buffalo guy got released, right?
Yeah, but that's hey, let me tell you what they're doing there. They're trying to make themselves look good right now. This is my opinion of that.
Red flag laws, wasn't that a good thing Trump give us?
Yeah. Was all for it. So take the guns first, and then we'll decide the guilt or innocence later. And so, but again, what you have is a group of people that have got armed security around them all the time. They don't see things like us old common boys do. Because Trump and his wife don't take step, or his son, none of them take step with that armed security around. I was at the fish fry 3 weeks ago talking to the governor, and you see all them great big tall boys over with their hands underneath their jackets. And then you got about 4 or 5 highway patrolmen standing around inside there. So I don't get to have that cadre of folks come with me to protect me when I'm leaving. And so they don't feel like it's a danger as long as they've got all that armed security around them.
Well, I don't think people that have armed security and get paid with our tax dollars should be allowed to make laws that restrict us for the same thing that they have the ability to.
You have to understand. Here's the thing. You have to go back to the Constitution of Tennessee, which, if you understand your history, Thomas Jefferson said that the Constitution of Tennessee was the least imperfect and the most Republican of all the documents that he had seen. And Article 1, Section 1 says that all power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness. For the advancement of those ends, they have at all times an unalienable and indefeasible right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manner as they may think proper. The problem that we have is people don't understand what the Constitution is. It's a contract amongst the folks. What we did was we got together, and you can go read the preamble to our Constitution, said the people of this area have decided to get together to form a government or a constitution. And so those two words are synonymous. They mean exactly the same thing in the Constitution. That means it's our government. And so what we did was we wrote down a set of hiring practices for the servants that we need to provide the services that we require as a government. We didn't set them up to be kings. We set them up to be our servants. And we say how old they got to be, where they got to live, what they get paid. All of that is covered in that contract. But the problem of it is they quit teaching the Constitution in schools 50 years ago. None of these kids these days know anything about it. When I go speak to different places, the first thing I do is say, how many of you people have read the Tennessee Constitution? And out of 40, 50 people in there, there'll be 2. If you don't know what the Constitution says, how can you demand your rights? And so that's what I try to get people to do, is to understand what the Constitution actually says. And I quote it all the time. I've testified in a number of committee hearings up there when I run these things out for them, because let me tell you what they have to do. They've got to keep a journal of every word that's spoken in testimony in a committee hearing. And so I had an individual say, I understand what you tried to do just then. He said, I don't think you took a breath in that 4 minutes. I said, I didn't try to do anything. I got the whole dang thing in the record, didn't I? You got to get up off of your couch. You're going to have to get involved. You've got to go to Nashville. You've got to look. If you want to know what's happening in Nashville, simply go to our TFA page, which is www.tennesseefirearms.com. When you open up that page, you will find over on the right-hand side a button that says subscribe. Now, that's what that's going to do, is that will get you our emails that come out to let you know what's happening, to keep you abreast of what's going on with court cases and legislation during the session of legislature. We put that out every week and tell you what bills are going to be up in what committees, so that you can figure what you need to do. We send out all the time. We've got a new deal that's going to take action. We'll actually write the email for you if you don't feel like you can parse the words to make it sound right. We'll write it for you and send it out, and all you got to do is hit a button, put your name in, it'll find your address and send it to your representatives. It is necessary that the people get involved in this mess, because if you don't, you're going to wind up as slaves, and your children are certainly going to be slaves. And that's what this whole control is. They can only get by with this if they can take the guns up.
That's what when we talked Saturday, you was saying there's some push or something going on with Lee, and ever since that Nashville thing.
Yeah.
That they are trying to take the guns out of Tennessee, because
that's exactly right. They want this red flag law, because once government takes your rights by increments. Nowhere in the Constitution, and by the way, the red flag laws that they have put into place, Biden and his group said, tell you what we'll do, states, if y'all will just simply insert these red flag laws into your jurisprudence, we'll give you a lot of your money back. Okay. So each of the states that have passed these things, and I think there are 19 of them, have gotten a lot of money from the federal government. All right. So it's kind of like the Department of Education and all this mess. Once you go ahead and take that money, you get all these strings that come with them. And so once you pass the red flag law, then they start inserting the ATF into your state. They start making new rules without it going to the legislature. They do all these things. It is necessary that we stand up and say, wait just a minute. No, all power is inherent in the people, not in the government that we hired to do our work. We've got to stand up, or they're going to take everything that we have away from us. And that's the whole intent and purpose. Once you get across the threshold on the red flag law, it makes it much simpler to say next thing, well, we just don't think y'all have those AR-15s. Those are weapons of war. I got news for you. A 22 pistol kills more people in the United States than all other guns put together. Is that an assault weapon? You bet your bippy it's an assault weapon, because assault is an act. You can assault somebody with a rock. It don't have to be a gun. But when you look at it, AR-15s kill far fewer people than little old cheap throwaway Saturday night special 22 pistols. And that's a fact. I can show it to anybody that wants to see. Most folks just don't want to hear the truth. They won't think, well, those assault weapons are bad. You can just keep shooting whatever. Well, let me tell you, if you got shot in the head with the 22 pistol, you're just as dead. Now, one of the other things I think that it is very, very, very prudent to describe, New York, we all know, is one of the most liberal states in the Union. 2 different times, red flag laws have gone to their Supreme Court in the last 6 months. In both times, they were found to be unconstitutional. So they've had to take the ERPOs, which is an extreme risk order of protection or protection order. They have said that they're not constitutional because they don't involve any due process. And so if the most liberal state in the union has said that you can't do that here, you have to throw it away because it's not constitutional, what do you think is going to happen when the rest of these states carry that case to their Supreme Court? It'll be ruled the same way, because Bruin has told us that the only thing you can use for scrutiny with respect to the Second or 14th Amendment, and just like we were talking about the Columbia case up there in Columbia, Tennessee, What and here's the interesting part about that. The judge who is in charge of our chief appellate court in Tennessee is the son of a former Democrat governor. And what his ruling said was you cannot try to cure a societal ill by taking away a constitutional right, nor can the citizen give it up of his own volition. Now, that goes back to that unalienable, which means you can't take it away, and indefeasible means you can't give it away. That right to self-defense, the true palladium of liberty, is a pre-existing right that was ours prior to the foundation and forming of this nation. It belonged to us before we hit the ground and took our first breath. And our Constitution recognizes that, but we're letting politicians take it away from us.
Yeah. I was I'm looking at that Frazier v. ATF case, that Judge Payne. It's pretty good. Pretty good. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I went through that line by line this week and pulled a bunch of the important stuff down. But what he does is he goes ahead and he quotes Heller, that was quoted in McDonald, that was quoted in Bruin, that he quotes again. And he says this across the board, everybody that is a member of the political community, and by the way, those who get to vote are members of the political community, are protected by the Constitution. And so therefore their ability to buy a handgun or to carry a handgun is guaranteed in the Constitution. And it went from Heller. Actually, it went from Koenigsberg earlier, which is like in the 50s, then to Heller, then to McDonald, now to Bruin, and now to this case. It's going to wind up going back to the Supreme Court because what's happened is all these jurisdictions, the 4th, the 2nd, the 7th, the 6th, you got different rulings from different appellate courts. And what's going to happen is it's finally going to have to get kicked back up to the Supreme Court. Now, did you see where the guy in Chicago, Illinois, the other day moved his case that he was beat back on because he's a FFL dealer and he sells AR-15s, and they said, you can't sell none anymore. He said, I got a room full of them things. The state of Illinois has said that I can't be involved in commerce. And one of the things that the Constitution of the United States is government can't get involved in commerce. If it's a lawful item, you can't tell me that I can't sell it. And so what he did was he appealed directly to the Supreme Court. He got Amy Coney Barrett, and she said, I want y'all to bring your arguments before me last Monday. And she's taken that one under consideration. That's going to wind up in the Supreme Court now.
Is that the one where they're talking about the restricted magazines? Or
well, it's restricted magazines, it's pistol grips, it's got all that stuff that you supposedly can't have, but by the same token, none of it is lawful or legal for them to do that.
No. Now, I've been seeing it. I mean, what we were talking about earlier with a spoon over there, talking about, you said it, and we talked about suicide, but it's like you can walk into a Dollar Tree for $1.25 and get a bottle of aspirin and take the whole thing and be your last headache.
Yep.
But, I always think back being a younger person watching Archie Bunker, and, when his daughters or whatever come in there and said something about, this many people are killed by guns in this country. And he looked at her and said, would you feel better if they were pushed out of windows?
Yeah.
It's like,
well, in the last 5 years, you've had a rise in suicide by big truck, where cars are getting on the interstate going the wrong way and purposely running into big trucks. You don't hear the politicians saying we need to get rid of automobiles or big trucks, do you?
Well, and the week before we had the shooting at Covenant, there was a car on Interstate 24 going to Chattanooga where 6 children were killed. And there were 8 people in that Camry at the time. They had a drunk driver cross the median, came over and hit that car, and it threw all of them out, and it killed 6 of them. Now, if in fact that was the case, and we know it was, then why haven't we seen Moms Demand Action and all the liberals at the Tennessee House say, look, it's just extremely dangerous for you to drive a car. Let's just ban all cars. Because far more people are killed by car accidents every year than are killed by guns in Tennessee.
Absolutely.
So
that's one thing I personally can't put up with is drinking and driving. I don't think anybody alive could come up with a good excuse why you should ever drink and drive, ever.
I do not disagree. But until we make it a capital offense, and until we see to it that lawyers don't like a lot of money. Hey, we had a legislator back in, I want to say it was 2012, 2014, maybe. There was a committee chair, got his divorce from his wife down there in Memphis, and he gets liquored up and he's driving down the road running 105 miles an hour with his pistol in his vehicle and a hooker in the seat next to him. He's still walking around. They made him resign his committee chair, but they left him in the General Assembly. How serious are they about making sure that doesn't happen again if they're going to let a legislator get by with that?
Well, they don't care about that because, taking your automobile away from you doesn't help them anyway. Restricting the people and taking guns away makes sure that another revolution never happens.
Well, that's true. And that's what they fear. You've seen the old meme that said government won't take your guns away from you because they're intending on doing stuff that would make you want to shoot them. And, all of that's true.
Lexington and Concord.
Yeah. And see, people don't get Lexington and Concord. So few people understand what was happening. Gage was marking out of Boston to pick up assault weapons and ammunition, because they knew that what they were doing with the Stamp Act and all this other stuff was going so bad that the people were finally going to get a gut full of it and say, hold on a minute, these people had been used to fighting bears and Indians and everything else, and they'd gotten pretty self-sufficient. And by the way, a lot of them were from Scotland and Ireland over here too, and they didn't necessarily like the British very much, because the way they had been treated before their progenitors. And so what they wanted to be sure that they were doing was taking up the assault weapons of the day, and that didn't work out well for them, did it? Because that was the shot heard around the world that started the whole conflagration, which is why we have an opportunity to be free today if we will but keep it.
I think back, the media and the politicians used to try to hide all the lies that they tell and the things that they do behind your back. They used to try to hide it, but it's got so far out of hand that you got a third of the population, at least, it's just so much brainwashed by the politicians, the government, and the media. Then you got another third that are stupid or just don't care. That the politicians and the media, they don't hide it anymore. They come out and tell you they're lying to you. They know they're lying. We know they're lying, but nothing ever gets done about it.
Well, it's like I said, if in fact the director of the TBI will tell you that the Second Amendment doesn't confer any right for an individual to carry a firearm, and that if in fact they're going to force him to admit that long guns were included in that, then it was only talking about muskets. That's a bold-faced lie. I don't think anybody is that ignorant. I think that is by design that he said those things. And it's an attempt on his part, under color of his official employment, to affect legislation that affects me and you. And so, just like you said, they're lying, and they don't expect anybody to question them on that. I'm going to question every time I get a chance.
Well, this day and age, people will speak on this because my shirt says I identify as a conspiracy theory. My pronouns are I told you so. People can just say what they are. I'm a woman, I'm a man, I'm a goat, I'm a cat, and everybody's just supposed to go along with it and everything be okay. That's what our countries came to. We let less than 5% of the population control us and make the laws and the rules about what you got to abide by today. And I'll never wrap my head around that. Never.
Let me tell you what's going to happen in this special session. If we can get enough people up off their haunches and off their couch and decide to show up, because I can promise you that Black Lives Matter, Moms Demand Action, what's that other group that's so for abortion?
Planned Parenthood.
They're fixing to absolutely inundate the General Assembly during that point, because they're all on the same page. They all want to take the rights of Americans to have firearms to protect themselves away from them. So they're going to all join hands. It's going to be a kumbaya thing, except that they're just going to they're going to bust them in like they did the last week of session up there. and they fixing to come in, jump up and down, scream and holler from the balcony and all that kind of stuff. But I have had a number of people tell me, said, I haven't been going to the General Assembly like you do. I haven't felt like it was necessary for me to take a day's vacation, go up there. August 21st and August 22nd, I've got vacation on the books now, and I'm going to take off and go. Now, what's going to happen is Grandpa's going to show up in his overalls, and he's going to have a 38 in his pocket. And all these hordes of the riders and all these people down there demonstrating and stuff, somebody's fixing to snatch Grandpa by one of his galluses, and that ain't going to end up good. I think that we will wind up having to have the National Guard on the streets at that point, because I think it's going to be a full-blown riot before it's over with. And every bit of the damage and the danger that's coming from this can be laid at Bill Lee's feet.
That clown show.
He has the whole caucus from the House and the Senate has both told him, we're not going to do this, and we don't think it's a good idea. We don't think you ought to have a special session. And he doesn't care. Where's the pressure coming on the governor of Tennessee to join hands and sing Kumbaya with the Jessies up there, or the Justins, I should say? What he's doing is he's playing right into Justin Jones' hand that we need to take all guns away from everybody. Now, you and I both know that if guns are taken away, the only people going to have them are criminals, because criminals got guns right now. They can't go into a store if you're a felon and buy a gun, but they got them, don't they? Just like you can buy marijuana, you can buy fentanyl, you can buy hash, you can buy methamphetamine, you can buy any of that stuff you want to, because just because you got a law don't mean that you can't get it. We've spent billions of dollars on the drug and we hadn't made a dent in it yet.
That's what I find comical about all these laws they try to implement. All they do is hurting the law-abiding citizens, because the criminals already have them and they're going to continue to get them.
That's exactly right.
Mr. Spoon can testify. I have 2 3D printers right there. I can make a gun. I've made a few. They work.
Well, see, people don't understand, but the AR-15 is the most owned type of weapon in the United States.
In common use.
And they're in common use, and they have said that in Heller and in McDonald and in Bruin. Guns that are in common use are protected by the Second Amendment. And Scalia even said in Heller, he said, to be as effective today as a militia was in the 1800s, M16 rifles and the like would be necessary for the general population to have, so that they could be as effective. He didn't say, no, you can't have them. He said, yes, they're protected. And anybody that's read, just like you were talking about a minute ago, Puddin', you're reading that Fraser case. That's what I've done with all of them. I've got here on my computer, I go through and I parse out the very important parts of it, and I've got them up so that I can use them for talking points when I go places.
Well, my gun attorney, he did over 2-hour video where he read the Bruin case, and it was amazing. Now, the one thing he had a problem with, and you may agree with this, is he got mad because they used the term citizens. And he said the founders did not use that term. They used the term people.
Well, and there is a dichotomy there, because people, they describe people. Heller spends quite a bit of time describing who the people were. He says it's every person that is part of the political community. Mm-hmm. And he goes on to further illustrate that. And he said a person that comes in here, even if they're not a citizen, they're part of the political community, because you can have aliens who are legal, that they just haven't been here long enough to get their citizenship, but yet they're able to own a firearm because that's covered. So, but if you go back to Heller and you read that, and they mention it both in McDonald and in Bruin too, about who the people are, and I tend to concur with you that the people is a better description than citizens, because if you're going to limit it just to citizens, there are a lot of folks here who are actually legal. A lot of them, by the way, are actually legal and who can own firearms. So it's better to just say the people and then use that term. It's a person who identifies with the political aspirations of this nation and liberty and justice. And so therefore people is a better deal. It's necessary in Bruin also to understand this deal about if it wasn't on the books at the time of the founding, you can't use it. That's the most important thing to come out of Bruin. Now, the sensitive place thing was mentioned in Heller and again in Bruin. When they say, if you go back to Heller, they said, we're not going to do a deep dive into what sensitive places are. You know, across the board, it has been generally understood that you can't carry guns in certain places, like government buildings, and they say courthouses. As bad as I hate to admit it, they made an error there. But what you have to understand that in the United States right now, there are about 19 different states that say you can carry guns in the courthouse. You just can't carry them in the courtroom. And so some states have gone so far as to say, if you're going to walk it to the door, we'll put an officer down there with a locked storage place where you can turn your gun over while you're in the courthouse, get a receipt, and when you come out to give it back to you, I'm good with that. You think these counties are going to love that because they're going to have to come out of their hip pocket to put that extra officer at every entrance to that place and a set of locked storage units so that they can take your firearm and put it there. Because you and I have an unfettered right to carry a firearm in case of confrontation with another. That is what the Second Amendment means.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, you can. I've always enjoyed our conversations, Mr. Archie, and I really appreciate everything you do for us.
I find it, before we go, I find it awful funny you're talking about the assembly and Planned Parenthood's going to be there in BLM. I have this morality thing where I don't think people who kill babies, even to the point to they're born and then kill them, or people who only protest against things that fit their political agenda, the BLM, because the black people in the inner cities are shooting and killing each other every day, and they don't stand up against that and their own people, but they'll stand up against anything that meets their political agenda on any certain given day. So I have this morality thing where I don't think those people get to determine and regulate what I do with my life and what my freedoms and liberties are.
Well, and I will say this, in talking to a number of my friends who are legislators, when we get into committees and we actually have one of these bills up that would enhance our ability to carry firearms for our self-protection, I'm characteristically the only person in the room. And you can find if you go to my YouTube channel or to the TFA YouTube channel, you'll see a couple of videos where I talk about this latest thing with the director of the TBI. And it shows a picture of me sitting there, and there's a whole room full of Moms Demand Action. I'm the only guy sitting there that's not got red on going Moms Demand Action. And at the end of that thing, you see the director of the TBI all cuddled up and hugging one of those Mom Demand Action guys. When he said that about muskets, they just yahooed and started clapping and carrying on. And anything that denies us our ability to provide for our own protection is fine with those folks. However, they have to achieve it. But when the director of the TBI reaches over and hugs one of those people on camera in public, that tells you where his mindset is.
Yep.
And if in fact that's the deal, then the people have got to start standing up. And again, like I said, the special session is going to be the 21st and 22nd. I think we need to have as many people there who care about liberty and freedom and the Second Amendment as those who are there to take it away from us. Because if we don't show up, then the only people they're going to see there vouching their agenda and what they think is going to be that Black Lives Matter and Moms Demand Actions and Planned Parenthood. If we don't show up, they're going to carry the day.
I think I need to see if I have to work those days so I can take vacation days.
It's a Monday and a Tuesday. I just wanted to go look to make sure.
Here's the thing. If you remember what happened in Virginia several years ago, they were trying to do away with assault weapons there. They put a fence up around the Virginia House. Okay. 10,000 people showed up carrying weapons because they said, you're not going to take our right. You're not going to do it. Now, they didn't storm the breastworks and shoot everybody inside, but they let them know by the number of folks there that were actually showing what they stood for and what they thought. Then the people inside had to go, hey, did you look out here? Ooh, I guess we might have to pay attention to the people that showed up. And what happens is if it's just Black Lives Matter and Moms Demand Action, that's what they're going to pay attention to. So we have got to get up off the couch and get there for that day.
Did you, real quick, I just one more quickly more interject. Did you see that Lieutenant Governor on Mara? I sent you that.
I did.
She's something else, ain't she?
Yeah, she is.
That was pretty good. I
She's
mean,
not afraid to say what she thinks, and
she don't care.
I
But I
have-
thought it was fascinating how I believe she's the one she's posing with her AR-15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, some of those folks over there understand that it is absolutely necessary to have that tool, because that's what it is. It's just like a chainsaw or a hatchet or a hammer or anything else. It's just simply a tool. It has no mind of its own. It can't pull a trigger by itself. That's one thing that got me. That idiot out there, actor that shot that girl, and he said, I didn't pull the trigger. Yes, you did. What kind of fool that knows anything about guns knows that he had to pull the trigger?
Spoon's he's got there's 3 of them on the wall. Spoon's sitting in that room where there's 3 of them on the wall over there looking at him. They
No, one
killed
of
him.
them's a pistol. Remember, it's long.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
It's long as a shotgun, but it's a pistol. Remember,
I haven't done what Diddle bitch took the brace off of it yet. I still got a few more weeks, but
I've got a couple of SBRs that are in jail right now with the ATF that have been in there since the 1st of September of last year.
I'm still trying to figure out how the ATF has the authority to waive the $200 tax stamp, like they're saying. That's not their, and there's a lot of worrisome that, they could come back to you in 2 years and say, oh, wait a minute, we waived it, but you owe it now.
Well, listen, let me tell you about that. What was it? There was a federal representative, John Dingell, I believe was his name. He said something about the fact that if you were looking for the most thuggish, black-booted group of individuals in the United States, it was the ATF. He was correct about that.
They were they're a joke agency, honestly. At this point, I don't.
You mean the people who murdered innocents with civilians in Waco?
Yeah, that group. Lana Ranchu was the guy that pulled the trigger there, and it ran to Weaver's house. Same dude pulling the trigger.
They could have.
Puddin didn't know that I did, but once he watched the last documentary Waco, that what's his name was there, because I told him that Oklahoma City was an after effect of what happened in Waco.
Yeah,
and he didn't know.
Well, that. I knew McVeigh had mentioned Waco as his bombing of Oklahoma City. I knew that, but I didn't know he was physically there selling stuff at Waco until the docuseries. Well, I'd had no idea Timothy McVeigh was there.
What he did at Oklahoma City was terrible. There's any doubt. But the thing that he said was, if you can burn children at one place, you ought to be able to burn them at another.
I mean, we talk about wounded,
but that was his reasoning.
Well, we talk about Wounded Knee a lot. I talked about it a lot on here because of the Vegas thing and the bump stocks and everything that come out of that. And I'm like, because they were portraying that as biggest mass shooting ever. And I'm like, well, Wounded Knee was almost,
but remember, me and the neighbor, we disagree because he tries to say that the Indian
citizens,
people of this nation, and I beg to differ. He says, well, they wasn't citizens. I said they were people of this nation because they were people of this land. And just like you talked about a while ago, just because they weren't legal doesn't mean they're not the people.
I mean, you could ostracize them and massacre them, I don't believe.
Yeah. No.
Doesn't give you the authority to. I mean, sure, the government was mad about Little Bighorn, but that wasn't the proper answer to the.
There's a reason to go shoot a bunch of women and kids.
No. All right. That's not a justification. And the soldiers that did that, should have all been taken out and hung. That's my opinion. But we talk about how the narrative gets shifted, just like you hear all this about, these mass shooters, and they want to red flag law everybody and use all this stuff for mass shooters. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. Was Columbine a mass shooting? Was there 2 shooters? So it's not just one shooter. They keep trying to justify these solo nut jobs, but you can't call Columbine a mass shooting because there was 2 of them.
Well, and here's the other thing. We're trying to get the manifesto released so that we'll know exactly what was going on in this woman's mind up there at night. And they're fighting us every step of the way. TFA has actually filed a lawsuit to get them to release that. And because the investigation is over, because there are no other people that are being investigated, because that shooter is dead, because there is no investigation of any type, they've got to release that information. And when they do, it's going to show, I think, that there was a long history of this, and it wasn't just mental instability. This was planned. It was laid out, and what she did was she found the weakest place that she could make her political statement, because that was a gun-free zone that allowed entry.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was a parent up there right now, I want to know why at that place, after they had a guy come in and give them a proposal to harden their school and make it safe, they didn't do any of the things that he suggested.
They knew exactly what she was going to do. They knew exactly where she was going to hit, but they used that as a tool to weaponize them to take our guns from us. You know,
Well,
they could have stopped it before it ever happened. 9/11 shootings they could have stopped before they ever happened.
here's the thing that I think is important for everybody to understand. We're all very, very appreciative of the quick response time from the Nashville police.
Absolutely.
Driving down the road that heard the call, and he swerved in, and he was one of the first guys in. He was a dude carrying an AR-15. I've heard his conversation in the interview they did with him, where he vouchsafed that it was very difficult for him to step over the bodies of those killed children. But he said, I had to keep moving towards the sound of gunfire. Whole lot different from that mess out there in Texas.
They need to send him out to Uvalde to train them, don't they?
Yeah. So what he did was he went straight to it, but it took him 14 minutes to get there. The average time for a 911 response in Tennessee is between 12 and 17 minutes. How many people can be killed in 14 minutes? We've seen. And so the other thing that is important for everybody to understand, what stopped that active shooter was a good guy with a gun. That's the only thing that you can use when a bad guy is using the gun to try to kill folks.
Just like
you can't talk to them. You can't implore them to, hey, won't you put that gun? You got to shoot them is what you got to do.
Just like the guy, the NRA instructor in Texas, when that guy was trying to shoot up that church.
Yeah.
He grabbed his AR-15, and that's about the only thing I think that could get to a school faster than a cop would be a nearby house with an AR-15 and an alert. Well, and I don't know if a old Spoon over there, if he was allowed to have one, criminal. If he was allowed to have one, I don't, I'm pretty sure he could get there as quick as the cops could, and might not be so worried about checking corners. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially if his kid's in that school.
Oh, either one of the schools that my kids go to, I could be there in under 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And you would be there with a gun, and you'd be not worried about cover. You'd be heading towards the sound of fire.
Exactly.
That's what you got to do. And like I said, these guys that showed up in Nashville, I'm very appreciative of them. No doubt about that. But look at the guy in the other church in Texas, the old instructor that was sitting in the back.
Oh, you're talking about the
shotgun and started shooting people there.
He didn't
started walking towards him, put one in his noggin. Blap.
Oh man, that was a great shot. That was I've watched that. I watched that multiple times. They made so many big iron memes about that guy. Boy, he pulled up and he was a 357 SIG he was shooting, and he just stopped it. Boom.
That's right. And again, like I said, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And
I'm not scared of people with guns sitting around me, honestly. It's just, we've been conditioned and trained that, well, they got a badge, you should feel comfortable. And I'm like, what's the difference between him and me? We put our pants on one leg at a time.
Well, and then there's this whole thing about, well, you should never carry openly. I'm going, oh, okay, well, let's make sure that all the popo have to deep conceal their weapons.
Yeah, no. But no, you can tell everybody where they can find you, and I could do this all day, but I know we all got other.
Again, www.tennesseefirearms.com. There's a wealth of information. We've got podcast up. We have got a lot of different news information on there, and like I said, we also keep up with what's going on at the legislature, and we put it out so that people will know. It doesn't cost you a dime to hit that subscribe button. We don't necessarily care whether you pay the $35 a year for a membership. And by the way, every individual that is an officer or director with the TFA does so gratis. We don't get paid a dime. I'm going to drive over to Lawrence County on the 23rd and give a speech to a Republican Party over there. I'm not going to get paid for my gas. I won't take the money from it. What we do is we're really volunteers like we're supposed to be in Tennessee. But again, www.tennesseefirearmsplural.com.
And your YouTube channel?
My YouTube channel is going to be the same as tennesseefirearms.com.
Okay. All righty. Well, I mean, it was good. I appreciate it. Just Spoons over there paying their lift. But no, Oh, I know you're listening. But no, you can come on anytime you want, Richard. It's good talking to you.
I appreciate you coming on. I was educated a little bit here today.
Well, there's a lot more of it to come, and I'll try to keep it less than an hour next time.
No, it was every time I've talked to you, I think we pretty much run 30 minutes or more.
Yeah,
we just get because there's so much to talk about that it's like, how did we get here? How did it, And I keep going back to Hitler a lot on that, where it's just like, first you get the moms and you get the children, then you got the future, and that's kind of what they've been doing since paperclip, I think. And that's why you talk about they take the Constitution out of school. They don't want us to know. They don't want you to know.
That's right.
And that Mr. Spoon there, that's what I was telling you on the phone Saturday. There was a before John Adams and an after John Adams.
That's correct.
And it changed. He used to say to me when we first met, well, you don't need an AR-15. You don't say it no more.
I still don't think everybody deserves a weapon.
There you go.
But it's not my job to regulate somebody else's freedom. So,
well, what it boils to, when you say not everybody, that's correct. There are people who are mentally deficient that don't need one. There are people who are guilty of a serious, violent felony that don't need one. And other than that, everybody else ought to be able to have one.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with you, and I think that the former two should be somewhere where they can't go and purchase one on Amazon.
That's correct. Well,
I think now if as long as you're not that violent criminal, if you can buy a tank and park in your front yard, you ought to be able to do it.
That's right. And see, one of the things that people need to understand about Heller, he says that every bearable arm is covered by the Constitution. And that would kind of take out tanks and F-16 because you can't pick them up and tow them. But
I'm a big old boy.
All of them, they're actually bearable arms and therefore are covered by the Constitution.
As long as I can have my bazooka, I'm good.
Yeah, there you go.
I wanted some RPGs. We need to get them Russian
Let me
imports.
tell you one thing. The director of the TBI was talking about, and I read through this thing with the Bruin decision, and Thomas talks about you can't carry dangerous and unusual weapons. Do you know the only definition of dangerous and unusual that I've been able to find in a lot of research came from Boston in 1787? And what their magistrate in Boston said at that time is you could not keep your cannon and your mortar inside your house loaded. You were okay to keep them empty, but it was a fire hazard if the house caught fire and the fire department came and tried to put it out. And so therefore it was illegal to keep your cannon and your mortar or your grenades loaded in your house. Now that, they said that was dangerous and unusual to have them loaded in your house. But otherwise, if you just had them shined up, skinny little pork pad on to keep them rusting, you're good to go.
Yeah.
And not everybody's going to spend the time to do the research on that, but I have.
Right. Well, like I said, Mr. RG, I appreciate you coming on, and Mr. Spoon got some little, because you've educated me on some of this state stuff, because I haven't. I'll admit I've been a little procrastinating on the state, and I don't follow it as much, but I follow the federal because it's everywhere. You can't flee to another state, and that's why that was what the Republican meant. If a state got too overbearing, you could flee to another one. But when the federal does it, you got to leave the country.
Well, the whole point of it is that if you understand the 10th Amendment, it says that the states have their own prerogative.
Yes.
As long as you haven't taken out, and see, most people don't understand what the Supremacy Clause says either. Article 6, Section 2 says, this Constitution and all laws which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States of America are the supreme law of the land, and judges in every state shall be bound thereby, the laws of any state notwithstanding. Okay, you have to go back to the first two words, this Constitution, and the Second Amendment is part of the Constitution, and it says that you can't be denied your ability to carry a firearm. If we would just simply get everybody to understand that, we would make it easier to get back to where we're supposed to be.
Well, I guess we can end on that note. What you think, Spoon? I mean.
Yep.
All righty, Mr. Richard, and we'll let me get some music going here. I don't know which one to play.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it.
All righty. Well, we'll see y'all next week. Probably.
See y'all next week.
All right.